Does hitting Final Fantasy XIII make you a sexist? I recently did a deep dive into the story of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and while it is certainly true that the game's storytelling reminded me of Kingdom Hearts, there was something more sinister about my experience of the game that I could just not put my finger on. Although my recent video sought to critique a remake of the beloved and legendary game, I found the game to be highly entertaining from a gameplay perspective. Sure, the story made absolutely no sense to a newcomer like myself, but it was an enjoyable experience nonetheless. But I had a deeper sense of deja vu deriving from something else. I felt like I had experienced this game before. So naturally, I chose to retrace my way through the details of the game. At first, we meet a young man named Cloud, who is an ex-soldier, aka a previous member of an elite Shinra-made fighting group, who is rather emotionally stunted in his nature, I would say. He wields the Buster Sword, a symbol synonymous with the installment itself as well. We are also introduced to Barret, a charismatic character that motivates his allies with his can-do attitude. He possesses a mechanical gun attached to his right arm. It is certainly notable that he is protective and fond of his daughter Marlene. We also meet Aerith in the remake. She enlists powerful magic while wielding a staff-like weapon. She is the last of the Cetra race, a group with special abilities, and is therefore hunted by Shinra in an effort to exploit her capabilities. It's also worth mentioning that her limit abilities are primarily restorative based and highly defensive. And then it hit me. It was like a special episode of your favourite TV show where the casts are replaced by a group of strangely similar doppelgangers. Except in this case we meet Lightning, a young woman who is an ex-Guardian Corps military organisation member and stoic character overall. She also wields an iconic weapon in the form of the Blaze Fire Saber. Furthermore, we meet Saz, whose entire specialisation in 13 is to buff his allies with his lively attitude. He wields two guns and is committed to saving and protecting his son Daj throughout the series. As for Vanille, she is a bright and cheery character that uses a staff-like weapon, and her healing capabilities underscore her entire character. She's also pursued and held captive by the Order of Salvation after dubbing her a saint due to her ability to hear the voices of the dead. So are you connecting the dots yet? You may think I'm grasping at straws here, but the similarities continue. At least from my perspective, having only played Remake, the idea of Sector 7 falling after being obliterated reflects the floating continent of Cocoon descending after the Final Fantasy XIII gang defeat Orphan. It could also be argued that the enemy of both games are the establishments at large in them, whether it's Shinra or the Sanctum. I think we can all agree that there are major commonalities between both Final Fantasy installments, but my intrigue does not stop there. After this realisation, I began to wonder about the huge success that 7 carved out for itself since its release. As of September 2023, the original Final Fantasy VII had sold around 14 million copies, with 7 million more for the remake. There aren't many up-to-date sources for Final Fantasy XIII's sales record, but the entire trilogy reportedly sold over 11 million copies worldwide. All in all, both games were highly successful from a commercial point of view, with 13 even attaining the fastest selling title in the franchise's history back in March 2010. This has since been beaten by 15, of course. But why does that feel like such a shocking fact? Having been a proud Final Fantasy XIII fanboy for over a decade now, I will never truly know what peace is. Many fans keep their love of the series secret, like it's a skeleton in their closet or something, only letting their guard down around other connoisseurs. They do this because it's simply not worth the pain of being lambasted by the mob of haters that hold Lightning and the gang to be part of the worst game in the overall series' history. And maybe you think I'm being dramatic, but Japan's national broadcaster NHK released the results of a countrywide poll that summarised the perception of the much disliked chapter in the Book of Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy XIII was ranked the third worst main entry, just ahead of 12 and 2, with 7 being ranked number 2. An unofficial poll on a sub about the worst game in the series on the Final Fantasy Reddit found that Final Fantasy XIII got the most hate, and this aligns with the mixed user score of 6.1 on Metacritic for the game, versus the strong 8.4 score for Final Fantasy VII on the same platform. Interestingly, Final Fantasy XIII achieves a higher critic score than Final Fantasy VII, although I am typically quite skeptical of critic reviews, as organisations like IGN tend to have relatively skewed reviews, with the average review garnering a score of 7.39, with a standard deviation of just 1.5. The aim of gaming press is to help promote and market new releases, and to generate hype around them. Either every game on average is good, and they simply do not review bad games, or the score is completely meaningless and it does not reflect a critical analysis of them. But this all got me thinking, how could a game, Final Fantasy XIII, take such heavily influence from the beloved Final Fantasy VII and break sales records and still be widely hated? Given that this game feels like Final Fantasy VII with a gender-swapped protagonist, I began to wonder if misogyny was at play. I recall hearing numerous swipes at Lightning over the years for being too cold and heartless, something that the same Final Fantasy fans would never criticise emotionally stunted Cloud from Final Fantasy VII 4. I also clearly remember disturbing comments from fans describing Vanille's appearance and overall personality. Although all I had was anecdotal evidence of misogyny directed at the game that launched in 2009, I was determined to test my hypothesis. How could I determine the root of the hatred felt by so many of the player base? Well, with good old computer skills, I first collated a dataset of all the reviews for Final Fantasy XIII that were available on Metacritic and on Steam. There were around 400 Metacritic reviews and 2,300 negative Steam reviews. I was stunned by how passionate people seemed to be about this topic, with some reviewers writing lengthy discussions about their experiences with the game. I subsequently performed some basic data pre-processing to ensure that my analysis would work as intended. This involved cleaning out links and useful information like HTML tags and stop words that would not contribute to any conclusion. I then put all this clean data into a new file and generated a word cloud from it. A word cloud is a really neat way of representing the most commonly occurring terms within a text. So in this case, I generated a diagram that showcases the most frequently used terms across all the reviews on Metacritic and on Steam. Interestingly, the word clouds for both Metacritic and Steam are quite similar. They both indicate that the story and the characters were a key element of the negative reviews. The characters were even more frequently mentioned across the Steam reviews. The linearity of the game and its overall combat mechanics seem to be mentioned frequently as well. So is there sexism present here? Well, it's hard to say at this level of analysis, but the fact that the characters are so central in these reviews means that we need to go a bit deeper into the meaning. So I enlisted a quick text-based machine learning model called dissecting for detecting sexism to help with my research. While this model is not perfect, I just want an indicator to see if there is additional evidence of widespread misogyny at play within these reviews. Detecting hate speech is a current area of research within the field of machine learning and natural language processing. But the biggest issue with it all is that there is an element of subjectivity when it comes to hate speech. What one individual finds sexist or homophobic may differ from person to person. Therefore, building a model to address this issue is quite tricky. Yet with this model, only 0.5% of reviews contained clear signs of sexism. That's 0.5%. So this suggests that while there is a small amount of misogyny that has contributed to the game's poor player reception, there is not compelling proof to say it's the root of the game's issues. One could argue that platforms like Steam and Metacritic may remove overly hateful and sexist comments on their platform, and that could be correct to an extent, as Metacritic seems to censor certain terms by replacing them with asterisks, but this only impacted a small number of reviews. While there is no conclusive evidence to support my hypothesis, it is true that a combination of the characters, the story, and the gameplay fuel the poor reviews. Linearity seems to be where many players coalesce in taking umbrage with the game. Around 25% of the reviews at least mention the linearity of the game, with both a bigram and trigram representation revealing the most commonly occurring terms with the word linear. Extremely linear, repetitive story, incredibly painful, boring, corridor gameplay. These are the kind of terms that are popping up the most. On the other hand, about 63% of the reviews reference the story with mixed perceptions. While the terms interesting and good occur frequently, terms like confusing, boring, and bad counter them. This suggests that the story was subject to mixed opinions, with 30% of the reviewers slating it for its pacing issues. The battle system is also discussed a lot, with many users describing it as boring, while others were fans of the mechanics. It seems like a lot of players found the auto combat feature to be highly problematic, while others found battling to be too passive, as they could only control one character per battle without being able to switch. So there you have it. The court of public opinion finds that the game's story and linearity are to blame for the majority of poor reviews of the game. I must admit myself that even though I adore Final Fantasy XIII, I find it tremendously difficult to replay. I think this is due to the stunted pacing, whereby there are long cutscenes that break up these excessively long corridors of battling the same limited pool of enemies. It just gets repetitive after a while. While there was little evidence to suggest widespread misogyny was at play, it is still possible that veiled sexism could be the root of more negative reviews. I think this is worth considering, as women are often held to double standards, where they are targets of scrutiny that is not applied to their male counterparts. I leave this point as inconclusive and for maybe further research in the future, as I found that the Final Fantasy VII Remake story was more convoluted than 13, but Cloud is still heralded as one of the most popular characters in the series, even if he and Lightning are cut from the same cloth. One could argue that the fact that Final Fantasy XIII borrows so heavily from the original Final Fantasy VII makes the much hated story boring in the sense that it is recycled. Fans had seen the story play out before and had met these characters before as well, so maybe this was a driving factor in the umbrage taken with the game. Yet given that I played Final Fantasy 13 before 7, maybe my love for 13 is a bit like the adoration for 7. Maybe the Final Fantasy VII Remake is my Final Fantasy 13, because to me, Final Fantasy 13 did it first. Thank you for watching.